The sound of gunfire cracked through the dawn like thunder, forcing Gideon Oakley to flatten himself against the dusty Montana earth as bullets whistled overhead. This wasn't how he'd planned to enter, but crawling on his belly with lead chasing his shadow. But then, nothing in his 30 years of life had gone according to plan. The year was 1878, and the West wasn't just wild, it was downright unforgiving. Gideon had been riding for 3 days straight, his weathered leather chaps worn thin at the knees, and his once white shirt now the color of the trail he'd been following. His dark hair hung past his collar, untrimmed for months, and his beard was thick with trail dust. Some called him handsome despite his rugged appearance, but those looks had never meant much to him. "Damn it all," he muttered, checking the chambers of his Colt revolver. 3 bullets left. Not nearly enough if the men pursuing him decided to be thorough about their work. Gideon had never been one to back down from a fight, but he wasn't foolish enough to think he could take on 5 men alone, not after riding for days with little sleep and even less food. The copper mining boomtown of Butte had seemed like a good place to disappear for a while, but clearly word had traveled faster than he had. He'd been running for 6 months now, ever since a card game in Denver had gone sideways. The man who'd accused him of cheating had drawn first. Gideon was sure of that much, but it hadn't mattered to the dead man's brothers. They'd been tracking him across 3 territories, and somehow they'd found him again. Another volley of shots peppered the ground around him, sending dirt spraying into his eyes. Gideon blinked away the sting and considered his options. The town proper was still a quarter-mile ahead, but between him and safety stretched an open expanse of scrubland with precious little cover. "Come on out, Oakley," a voice called. "We just want to talk." Gideon almost laughed. The kind of talking they had in mind involved rope and the nearest sturdy tree. He glanced around desperately, looking for any advantage. About 50 yards to his left, a narrow gully cut through the landscape. It wasn't much, but it might provide enough cover to make a run for it. Taking a deep breath, he holstered his gun and prepared to sprint. The moment there was a lull in the gunfire, he took off, keeping low and zigzagging as he'd learned during the war. He'd barely made it 10 yards when a bullet grazed his arm, tearing through his sleeve and drawing a line of fire across his skin. Gideon bit back a curse and dove into the gully, sliding down its steep embankment. His heart hammered in his chest as he pressed his back against the dirt wall, trying to catch his breath. Blood seeped through his shirt, but he didn't have time to check the wound, spread out. The voice was closer now. "Check that ravine." He needed to move. Staying low, Gideon began working his way along the gully, heading toward town. If he could just reach the outskirts, maybe he could lose himself among the buildings and people. The sound of hoofbeats made him freeze. Someone was approaching the gully from ahead, cutting off his escape route. Trapped between his pursuers and this new threat, Gideon drew his revolver again, prepared to make his stand. A horse appeared at the edge of the gully, a chestnut mare with a white blaze. Its rider was silhouetted against the morning sky, but as they descended into the ravine, Gideon realized with surprise that it was a woman. She wore a dark riding skirt and a cream-colored blouse, her honey-brown hair partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She pulled up short when she spotted him, her eyes widening at the sight of his drawn weapon. "Get out of here," Gideon hissed. "There are men with guns coming." Instead of fleeing, the woman assessed him with a quick glance, taking in his bloodied arm and the tension in his stance. To his amazement, she extended her hand. "Get on," she said, her voice low and urgent. Now, Gideon hesitated. "Lady, you don't want to get mixed up in this. Those are the Blackwell brothers behind you, aren't they?" When he nodded, she gestured more insistently. "Then you're already dead if you stay here. Come on." The sound of men climbing down into the gully made the decision for him. Gideon holstered his gun and grabbed her hand, swinging up behind her on the horse. The woman immediately spurred the mare forward, guiding the animal up the opposite bank of the gully with practiced ease. "Hold on," she called over her shoulder, and then they were galloping across the open ground toward Butte. Gideon glanced back to see his pursuers scrambling to return to their horses. They'd have to circle back to where they'd left their mounts, which would buy some time, but not much. "Who are you?" he asked, raising his voice to be heard over the thundering hooves. "Beatrice Lawson," she replied without turning around, "and you're making my morning far more exciting than I'd planned." Despite everything, Gideon found himself almost smiling. "Gideon Oakley, sorry about the inconvenience." "Save your breath, Mr. Oakley, we've got a ways to go yet." She rode with confidence, taking them not toward the main streets of but along a narrow trail that wound through the foothills. The town itself was growing rapidly, the discovery of copper having transformed what had once been a small silver mining camp into a bustling settlement. Buildings sprawled across the valley and up the surrounding slopes, but Beatrice bypassed them all, heading for what appeared to be a small homestead on the outskirts. A modest cabin came into view, situated on a rise that overlooked the town. A barn stood nearby, and a corral held several horses that lifted their heads at their approach. Beatrice didn't slow until they reached the yard, where she finally reined in her mare. "Get inside," she instructed, dismounting swiftly. "I'll take care of the horse." Gideon slid down, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded arm. "They'll be coming." "Not here, they won't." Beatrice took the reins and nodded toward the cabin. "Go on, there's water inside if you want to clean up that arm." Too exhausted to argue, Gideon made his way to the cabin door. The interior was simple but well kept, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with chairs, a bed in one corner, and a small kitchen area. He spotted a basin of water on a stand near the window and went to it, peeling off his bloodied shirt to examine the wound. The bullet had only grazed him, leaving a shallow furrow about 3 inches long. It stung like fire but wasn't serious. Gideon dipped a cloth in the water and began cleaning away the blood, grimacing at the pain. The door opened behind him, and Beatrice stepped inside, removing her hat to reveal the full glory of her honey-brown hair, which was pulled back in a practical braid. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with clear blue eyes that regarded him with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "Let me see that," she said, approaching him and taking the cloth from his hand. Her fingers were calloused but gentle as she examined the wound. "It's not too deep. You're lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Gideon replied. "Bad aim, more like. Those Blackwell boys never could shoot straight." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "You know them well." "Well enough to know I don't want to know them better." He watched as she retrieved a small tin from a shelf and opened it to reveal a salve that smelled of herbs. "You mind telling me why you stuck your neck out for a stranger?" She applied the salve to his wound with careful fingers. "I've had my own run-ins with the Blackwells. Let's just say I know what kind of men they are, and I figured anyone they're chasing might deserve a chance." "That's a dangerous way of thinking." "Maybe." She finished with the salve and began wrapping a clean strip of cloth around his arm. "But I've found that most folks deserve at least one second chance, even the ones who don't pray." Gideon stiffened slightly. "What makes you think I don't pray?" Beatrice tied off the bandage and stepped back, her blue eyes meeting his directly. "The way you carry yourself. Like a man who believes he's all alone in this world." Her assessment hit uncomfortably close to the mark. Gideon had given up on God a long time ago, somewhere between watching his parents' farm burn during the war and burying his younger brother after a cholera outbreak. The universe, in his experience, operated without divine intervention or mercy. "Well, I appreciate the help all the same," he said, reaching for his shirt only to realize how filthy it was. Beatrice seemed to read his thoughts. She crossed to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a man's shirt, faded blue cotton that had seen better days but was clean. "Here, this should fit well enough." Gideon hesitated before accepting it. "I don't mean to be rude, but it was my brother's," she said, answering his unspoken question. "He's gone now, wouldn't mind it being put to use." He nodded his thanks and pulled the shirt on, noticing it was indeed a good fit across his shoulders. "Your husband won't mind me being here," a shadow crossed her face. There is no husband, just me." That explained why she lived alone on the outskirts of town, a fact that struck Gideon as both dangerous and brave. But wasn't exactly the safest place for a woman on her own, especially one as attractive as Beatrice Lawson. "The Blackwells," he said, buttoning the shirt. "You mentioned you've had run-ins with them." Beatrice moved to the stove, where she began preparing coffee with practiced movements. "They wanted this land. My father staked the claim years ago before the copper boom. When he died, they tried to run me off." A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. "They found out I'm not so easily intimidated. They're not men who give up easily. Neither am I." She set the coffee to boil and turned back to him. "Now, why don't you tell me what you did to get on their bad side?" Gideon sank into one of the chairs at the table, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. "Their brother Drew accused me of cheating at cards in Denver. When I denied it, he went for his gun." He shrugged. "I was faster." "Self-defense, then. Try telling them that." Gideon ran a hand through his hair, pushing it back from his face. "They've been on my trail ever since. I thought I'd lost them in Wyoming, but they're more persistent than I gave them credit for." Beatrice poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought them to the table, sitting across from him. "So what's your plan now?" "Same as it's been. Keep moving." He took a sip of the coffee, savoring its warmth and strength. "I'll head out tonight once it's dark, head north, maybe try my luck in Canada. And just keep running." She studied him over the rim of her cup. "That's no kind of life, Mr. Oakley." "It's the only one available to me at the moment." Beatrice shook her head slightly. "There are other options. Sheriff Davis in town is a fair man. If what happened truly was self-defense, he might help you." Gideon gave a short laugh. "I've not had good experiences with lawmen being interested in the truth." "Not all men are the same," she said, and there was something in her tone that made him look at her more closely. "Some still believe in justice." Before Gideon could respond, the sound of approaching riders reached them. He was on his feet in an instant, hand going to his gun. "Easy," Beatrice said, rising more calmly. "That won't be the Blackwells." She went to the window and peered out, then nodded as if confirming her suspicion. "It's just Ben Davis, the sheriff I mentioned, and his deputy. They make regular rounds out this way." Gideon tensed nonetheless. "You expect me to believe that's coincidence in a town this size? Probably not." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Word travels fast in Butte. Someone would have reported the shooting and the chase by now. And you're just going to hand me over to them?" He felt the familiar surge of betrayal, wondering how he could have been foolish enough to trust a stranger. Beatrice's blue eyes flashed with unexpected fire. "If I'd wanted to hand you over, Mr. Oakley, I would have left you in that gully for the Blackwells to find." She moved toward the door. "Now sit down and let me do the talking. Sheriff Davis is a friend." Despite his misgivings, Gideon returned to his chair, though he kept his hand near his holster. If this turned out to be a trap, he wouldn't go down without a fight. Beatrice opened the door before the riders could knock, greeting them with a casual ease that suggested familiarity. "Morning, Ben." "Liam, coffee's fresh if you're interested." The sheriff, a weathered man in his 40s with graying hair at his temples, dismounted with a nod. "Obliged, Beatrice, but we're not here for social calls today." His eyes moved past her to where Gideon sat at the table. "I see you've got company." "A friend passing through," she said smoothly. "Got himself a bit scraped up on the trail." Sheriff Davis and his young deputy tied their horses to the hitching post and approached the cabin, both men keeping their hands casually near their weapons. The sheriff's gaze was assessing as he entered, taking in Gideon's appearance and the fresh bandage visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. "Interesting," Davis said. "Because we got reports of gunfire out by the east approach this morning, and a description of a man who looks an awful lot like your friend here being pursued by 5 riders." Gideon rose slowly to his feet, watching the lawman carefully. "I'm Gideon Oakley. And yes, those men were shooting at me. Any particular reason they'd want to do that? Their brother drew on me in a card game in Denver. 6 months ago, I defended myself. The sheriff exchanged a glance with his deputy. "Would that be Drew Blackwell?" Gideon nodded. Davis removed his hat, revealing more of his graying hair. "The Blackwell boys rode into town about an hour ago, making a lot of noise about a killer they were tracking. Said he was armed and dangerous." "They're the dangerous ones," Beatrice interjected. "You know what kind of men they are, Ben." The sheriff regarded her thoughtfully. "I do, which is why I'm inclined to hear Mr. Oakley's side of things before making any decisions." He turned back to Gideon. "How about you tell me exactly what happened in Denver?" Gideon hesitated, looking between the sheriff and Beatrice. Her small nod of encouragement shouldn't have mattered to him. He barely knew her, but somehow it did. He took a deep breath and told the story from the beginning. The card game at the Silver Dollar Saloon, Drew Blackwell's accusations, the moment when Drew had reached for his gun first. "I didn't want to kill him," Gideon finished, "but he didn't leave me much choice." Sheriff Davis listened without interruption, his expression giving nothing away. When Gideon was done, the lawman turned to his deputy. "Liam, ride back to town and send a telegram to the Denver marshal. Ask about a shooting involving Drew Blackwell and Gideon Oakley 6 months ago. See what they say about it." The young deputy nodded and departed, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the cabin. "What now?" Gideon asked finally. "Now." Davis accepted the cup of coffee Beatrice offered him. "Now we wait. If your story checks out, you've got nothing to worry about from me. The Blackwells, on the other hand." He shook his head. "They're another matter." "I can't just sit here while you verify my story," Gideon protested. "Those men will tear this town apart looking for me." "They'll be occupied for a while," the sheriff said with a hint of satisfaction. "I had my deputy lock them up for disturbing the peace when they rode in, shooting their mouths off. Told them I'd release them once they cooled down." He sipped his coffee. "Should buy us a day or two." Beatrice smiled slightly. "Always were clever, Ben." The sheriff's weathered face softened a fraction when he looked at her. "Your father taught me a thing or two about handling troublemakers." He turned back to Gideon. "So, Mr. Oakley, you have a choice. You can ride out now, I won't stop you. But those Blackwells will be right behind you as soon as I have to let them go. Or you can stay put until I get confirmation of your story, in which case I'll have legal grounds to send them packing." It was a fair offer, fairer than Gideon had expected from a lawman. Still, years of experience had taught him not to place too much faith in the justice system. "And if Denver doesn't back my story, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Davis said. "But I've got good instincts about people, and you don't strike me as a cold-blooded killer." He finished his coffee and set the cup down. "I'll leave you to think about it. Beatrice can get word to me when you decide." After the sheriff had gone, Gideon paced the small confines of the cabin, weighing his options. Running had become second nature to him over the past 6 months. The idea of staying put, of waiting for justice to take its course, felt foreign and dangerous. "He's a good man," Beatrice said, breaking into his thoughts. "If anyone can help you, it's Ben Davis." Gideon paused in his pacing. "Why do you care? You don't know me from Adam." She was silent for a moment, her hands busy with washing the coffee cups. "When my father died and the Blackwells tried to run me off this land, not many people in Butte were willing to stand up for me. A woman alone, they said, had no business trying to keep a homestead." Her movements slowed. "Ben Davis was one of the few who believed I had the right to fight for what was mine." "So you're returning the favor by helping a stranger." Beatrice turned to face him, and there was a depth to her blue eyes that made Gideon's breath catch. "I'm helping someone who deserves a chance at justice, same as I did." She dried her hands on her apron. "But if you want to keep running, that's your choice. The spare horse in the corral is sound and could use the exercise." The offer hung between them, genuine and unexpected. Gideon studied her, trying to understand what motivated such generosity toward a man she'd just met. He'd spent so long distrusting everyone that Beatrice Lawson's straightforward kindness was almost more disturbing than the Blackwells' pursuit. "I'll stay," he found himself saying, the decision surprising him even as the words left his mouth. "At least until we hear from Denver." Something that might have been relief flickered across Beatrice's face. "Good, you can help me mend the fence on the north side while we wait." No sense in wasting daylight. And just like that, Gideon Oakley found himself temporarily settled on a homestead outside Butte, Montana, with a woman who seemed determined to believe the best of him despite having every reason not to trust strangers. It was the oddest turn his life had taken in years, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just shifted in the landscape of his existence. As he followed Beatrice outside to begin work on her fence, he wondered if perhaps his luck was finally changing, or if this was simply the calm before an even greater storm. The day passed in a blur of physical labor that felt surprisingly good after months of being constantly on the move. Beatrice worked alongside him, showing no hesitation about tackling the heavy posts or stretching the wire. She was stronger than she looked, and Gideon found himself admiring both her determination and her skill. "You've been doing this a while," he observed as they paused to drink water from a canteen around midday. Beatrice wiped her brow with the back of her hand. "Since I was 12. My mother died when I was young, so I became my father's right hand." She passed him the canteen. "He taught me everything he knew about ranching, mining, and standing my ground. No brothers or sisters to help," a shadow crossed her face. "My brother James was older. He went east to study and never really came back except for short visits. When he died of pneumonia 3 years ago, it was just me and Pa until last winter." She looked out over the land, her expression softening. "Pa always said we were sitting on a fortune here, but he wasn't interested in the copper like everyone else. He just loved the land." Gideon could understand that. He'd grown up on a small farm in Missouri before the war had changed everything. There was something about working the earth that spoke to a man's soul in a way few other things could. "What about you?" Beatrice asked. "Where were you before Denver?" "Here and there," he said, deliberately vague. "Served in the war, then drifted. Tried my hand at a few things, cowboying in Texas, freight hauling in Arizona, even a stint in a silver mine in Nevada." He handed the canteen back to her. "Nothing really stuck, and family all gone." The words came out flatter than he'd intended, and Beatrice didn't press further. They worked until the sun began to set, by which time the fence was mended and Gideon's muscles ached pleasantly from honest work. As they walked back to the cabin, the lights of Butte twinkled below them, the mining town coming alive for the evening. "It's a pretty sight from up here," Gideon remarked. "Less pretty when you're down in it, I imagine." Beatrice smiled. "Butte has its rough edges, but there's good here too. People helping each other survive in a harsh place." She glanced at him. "Kind of like anywhere, I suppose. You find what you're looking for." Inside the cabin, she busied herself preparing a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. The domesticity of it all felt strange to Gideon after so long on the trail, eating whatever he could find or afford in saloons and cheap boarding houses. "I can sleep in the barn," he offered as they ate. "Don't want to put you out of your bed." Beatrice shook her head. "There's a perfectly good pallet I can make up by the fire. You take the bed, you're still healing." He wanted to argue but could see from the set of her jaw that it would be futile. This was clearly a woman accustomed to having her way when she'd made up her mind. After they'd finished eating and cleaned up, an awkward silence fell between them. Gideon was acutely aware that they were two unmarried adults alone in a remote cabin, a situation that would raise eyebrows even in a place as rough as Butte. "I should check on the horses," he said, eager for a moment to clear his head in the night air. Outside, the stars blazed overhead in a velvet sky, their light casting silver shadows across the landscape. Gideon took a deep breath, letting the cool mountain air fill his lungs. It had been a strange day, perhaps the strangest in a long series of unusual days since he'd killed Drew Blackwell. The horses nickered softly as he entered the barn, and he spent some time checking on them, making sure they had water and feed. The chestnut mare that had carried both him and Beatrice that morning came to the stall door, nudging his shoulder with her soft muzzle. "You're a good girl," he murmured, stroking her neck. Saved my hide today. Her name is Penny, Beatrice's voice came from the barn doorway. She walked in carrying a lantern, its glow casting warm light across her features. Short for Penelope, she was a gift from my father on my 16th birthday. Gideon continued petting the horse. She's a fine animal, steady under pressure. Like her owner, Beatrice said with a small smile. She came to stand beside him, reaching up to scratch Penny behind the ears. I came out to tell you the pallet is made up whenever you're ready. Thank you. He was suddenly, uncomfortably aware of how close she was standing, of the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair. Beatrice, B, she corrected. My friends call me B, he amended, the name feeling right on his tongue. I want you to know I appreciate what you've done. Not many would stick their neck out for a stranger the way you have. In the lantern light, her eyes seemed impossibly blue. Maybe I'm just a fool. Or maybe you're the kind of person this world needs more of, he said softly. Something passed between them, then a current of understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a moment, Gideon thought she might move closer, but instead, Beatrice took a small step back, breaking the spell. We should get some rest, she said. Morning comes early, he nodded, following her out of the barn and back to the cabin. The pallet she'd made looked comfortable enough, with blankets and a pillow arranged near the hearth where embers still glowed. Gideon felt a twinge of guilt at taking her bed, but he could see she wouldn't be swayed. Good night, Gideon, she said, turning down the lamp until only a faint glow remained. Good night, B, he replied, watching as she disappeared behind a makeshift screen in the corner where she would change. Sleep came more easily than he'd expected. Exhaustion from the day's events and the comfort of a real bed combining to pull him under quickly. His dreams were a confused jumble of gunfire and pursuit, but throughout them ran a thread of something new, a pair of blue eyes that seemed to promise safety and understanding. He woke at dawn, habit driving him to alertness even before the first rays of sunlight filtered through the cabin windows. Beatrice was already up, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil. She had changed into a simple brown skirt and white blouse, her hair freshly braided and hanging over one shoulder. You're an early riser, he observed, sitting up. Farm habits die hard, she replied, glancing over at him. Sleep well, better than I have in months, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. He was suddenly conscious of his unkempt appearance, the beard that had grown too long, the hair that needed cutting. Is there somewhere I might clean up properly? I feel like a wild man, Beatrice smiled. There's a wash basin on the porch with fresh water, and I can find you a razor if you'd like to tame that beard. After breakfast, Gideon took her up on the offer, carrying the wash basin outside for privacy. The mirror she provided was small but adequate, and he took his time shaving away the months of growth, revealing a face he hardly recognized anymore. When he was done, he looked younger, less haunted though the wariness in his eyes remained. He was just finishing when the sound of an approaching horse made him tense. Setting aside the razor, he moved to where he could see the trail, relaxing slightly when he recognized the sheriff's deputy. Beatrice came out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. Liam, she called as the young man rode up. Any news? The deputy dismounted, looking first at Beatrice and then at Gideon with open curiosity, clearly taking note of his freshly shaven face. Sheriff sent me. Got a reply from Denver late last night. Gideon's heart began to pound. This was the moment that would determine whether he kept running or found a way to stop. What did they say? Liam pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. Marshall confirms there was a shooting involving Drew Blackwell and a man matching your description 6 months ago at the Silver Dollar Saloon. He unfolded the paper and read directly from it. Witnesses stated Blackwell accused Oakley of cheating, then drew his weapon first. Shooting ruled self-defense. No charges filed. He looked up. There's more about the Blackwell family making threats, but that's the gist of it. Relief washed over Gideon like cool water. He'd known he was in the right, but having official confirmation after all this time felt like a weight lifting from his shoulders. The sheriff believes this. He does, Liam nodded. Said to tell you you're free to go about your business but without fear of arrest. His expression grew more serious. The Blackwells are another matter. Sheriff had to let them out this morning, but he warned them off causing trouble. Don't know how long that'll stick, though. Not long, Gideon said grimly. They didn't chase me across 3 territories to give up now. Beatrice stepped forward. Thank Ben for us, Liam, and tell him we'll be careful. The deputy's eyebrows rose slightly at her use of we, but he didn't comment on it. Sheriff says he'll send out a patrol this way every few hours just to keep an eye on things. He mounted his horse again. You might want to stay close to the homestead for a day or two, Mr. Oakley, until we see what the Blackwells decide to do. After he'd ridden away, Gideon turned to Beatrice. You don't have to keep putting yourself at risk for me. I could head out now that my name's cleared. And go where? She asked practically. Besides, those men have it in for me almost as much as they do for you. We might as well face them together if it comes to that. She looked him over, a small smile touching her lips. You clean up nice, by the way. The unexpected compliment caught him off guard, and he felt a warmth spreading across his face that had nothing to do with the morning sun. Been a while since anyone cared how I looked. Well, you look like a proper gentleman now, not some wild mountain man. Her smile widened. Come on. Since we're temporarily confined to the homestead, you can help me with the vegetable garden. It needs weeding something fierce. The day passed peacefully, with no sign of the Blackwells or any other trouble. Gideon found himself settling into a rhythm with Beatrice that felt surprisingly natural. They worked side by side in the garden, repaired a leak in the cabin roof, and checked the rest of the fence line. In between tasks, they talked hesitantly at first, then with growing ease. He learned that she had taught herself to read from her mother's small collection of books, that she could play the fiddle, though not very well by her own admission, and that she dreamed of one day breeding horses. In turn, he told her about his childhood in Missouri, his time serving with the Union during the war, and his drifting years afterward. What will you do now? She asked as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Now that you don't have to run anymore, Gideon had been asking himself the same question all day. For so long, his only goal had been to stay ahead of the Blackwells. With that pressure potentially removed, he felt strangely directionless. I'm not sure, he admitted. Find work somewhere, I suppose. Been too long since I stayed in one place. You could stay here, Beatrice said quietly, not looking at him. But's growing fast, lots of opportunities for a man who's not afraid of hard work. The suggestion stirred something in Gideon, a longing for stability he'd thought long dead. Why would you want me to stay? You barely know me. Now she did turn to him, her expression serious. I know enough. I know you're a man who defends himself but doesn't look for trouble. I know you work without complaining and you're kind to animals. I know you listen when I talk, really listen. She paused. Those are rare qualities, Gideon Oakley. Before he could respond, the distant sound of galloping horses broke the evening quiet. Gideon was on his feet in an instant, hand going to his gun. Get inside, he told Beatrice, scanning the approaching trail. She stood but didn't move toward the door. I'm not hiding in my own home. Damn it, woman, there are rifles inside, she interrupted. Better than that 6-shooter if it comes to a fight. Gideon wanted to argue, but she was right. He followed her into the cabin, where she unlocked a cabinet and removed 2 Winchester repeating rifles, handing one to him. They positioned themselves at the windows, watching as 5 riders appeared at the edge of the property. It's them, Gideon confirmed grimly, recognizing the Blackwell brothers even in the fading light. Looks like they decided not to heed the sheriff's warning. I'm not surprised, Beatrice replied, checking her rifle with practiced hands. They've never been ones to listen to reason. The riders stopped just beyond the yard, clearly visible but out of effective rifle range. One of them, a heavy-set man with a bushy beard, called out, Oakley. We know you're in there. Come on out and face us like a man. That's Jeremiah Blackwell, Beatrice murmured. The oldest brother, the others are Luther, Samuel, Ezekiel, and Caleb. You know them well. Know your enemies better than your friends, she replied grimly. My father taught me that. Gideon raised his voice to be heard outside. Your brother drew on me first, Blackwell. Denver ruled it self-defense. We don't care what some marshal says, Jeremiah shouted back. Family justice is what we're after, and we mean to have it. 5 against 1 doesn't sound like justice to me, Beatrice called out, surprising both Gideon and the Blackwells. It sounds like cowardice. There was a moment of stunned silence before Jeremiah responded. This ain't your fight, Lawson woman. But if you stand with him, you'll fall with him too. Gideon shot Beatrice a worried glance. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, she said firmly. They've been trying to run me off this land for a year. This is as much my fight as yours. Outside, the Blackwells conferred briefly before Jeremiah called again. We're giving you till morning, Oakley. Come out alone at dawn, or we're coming in after you and the woman too. With that, they wheeled their horses around and rode back down the trail, presumably to make camp somewhere nearby and wait for dawn. Gideon lowered his rifle, mind racing. They're trying to force my hand. It won't work, Beatrice said resolutely. We send word to Sheriff Davis. He'll bring men. And if they don't arrive in time, Gideon shook his head, I won't risk your life, B. This is my fight. It became my fight the moment I helped you in that gully, she countered. And I told you the Blackwells have been after my land since my father died. This was always going to come to a head eventually. They argued back and forth as darkness fell completely, neither willing to concede. In the end, they compromised. Gideon would ride into town under cover of darkness to alert the sheriff, while Beatrice remained at the homestead. He would return before dawn and they would face whatever came together. Be careful, she said as he prepared to leave, her hand briefly touching his arm. They might have left someone watching the trail. I'll take the long way around, he promised. Bar the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me or the sheriff. The ride into Butte took longer than usual as Gideon avoided the main trail, picking his way carefully through the foothills. The town was still lively when he arrived, the saloons and gambling houses doing brisk business despite the late hour. He found Sheriff Davis at his office, thankfully still awake and reviewing paperwork. The lawman listened gravely to Gideon's account of the Blackwells' ultimatum. Damn fools, he muttered. I warned them to leave it be. He stood and reached for his hat. I'll round up some deputies. We can be at the Lawson place before dawn. They said they'd come at dawn, but I wouldn't put it past them to try something sooner, Gideon said. I need to get back to her. Davis nodded. Go. We'll be right behind you. The return journey was even more tense, with Gideon constantly scanning for any sign of ambush. He approached the homestead carefully, relieved to see a single lamp still burning in the window, their agreed-upon signal that all was well. Beatrice opened the door at his soft knock, a rifle in her hands and relief evident on her face. You made it back. Sheriff's gathering men, he told her as he entered. They'll be here before dawn. She secured the door behind him. Good, I've been keeping watch. No sign of movement out there, but I don't trust them to wait until morning. They took turns keeping vigil through the night, one sleeping while the other watched from the window. During his shift, Gideon found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Beatrice as she slept on the pallet by the fire. In just 2 days, this woman had upended his world completely. She'd offered trust when he expected suspicion, kindness when he expected judgment, and partnership when he expected to stand alone. The realization that he cared what happened to her cared deeply was both terrifying and exhilarating. When it was his turn to rest, sleep came fitfully. He dozed rather than truly slumbered, his body too attuned to potential danger to fully relax. He woke fully when Beatrice gently shook his shoulder. It's almost dawn, she whispered. No sign of the sheriff yet. Gideon rose, checking his weapons. They might have delayed him somehow. He peered out the window at the graying landscape. Can you see any movement out there? Nothing yet. Her face was calm, but he could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. We should prepare for the worst. They positioned themselves at different windows, rifles ready. As the first hint of sunlight began to color the eastern sky, Gideon spotted movement at the edge of the property. "They're coming," he said quietly, "all 5 of them on foot this time." Beatrice joined him at his window, counting. "I only see 4. A chill ran down Gideon's spine. "Where's the 5th? The answer came a moment later with the sound of breaking glass from the back of the cabin. They whirled to see a lantern sailing through the shattered window, flames already spreading as it hit the floor. Fire. Beatrice gasped, rushing to grab a blanket to smother the flames. "They're trying to smoke us out," Gideon realized, even as gunfire erupted, bullets splintering the wood around the windows. He returned fire, forcing the advancing Blackwells to dive for cover. Get down." She had managed to stamp out the initial flames, but was now trapped away from the windows by the continuing gunfire. "There's more kerosene in the kitchen," she called. If they hit that, she didn't need to finish the thought. If the cabin caught fire in earnest, they'd have no choice but to flee into the open, exactly what the Blackwells wanted. "We need to make a break for the barn," Gideon decided. "It's more defensible and we can use the horses if we need to run." "There's a back door," Beatrice said, pointing. "Through the kitchen. We might be able to slip out that way while they're focused on the front." Another volley of gunfire peppered the cabin, and something in the kitchen shattered, hopefully not the kerosene. Gideon motioned for Beatrice to stay low as they made their way toward the back door. Just as they reached it, the front door splintered under a heavy impact. Someone was trying to break it down. Gideon fired a shot in that direction, buying them a few precious seconds as Beatrice eased the back door open. "Go," he urged. "I'm right behind you." She hesitated only a moment before slipping outside, rifle at the ready. Gideon followed, closing the door quietly behind them. The barn was about 50 yards away across open ground, a dangerous dash with armed men nearby. "On my count," Gideon whispered. 1, 2, 3. They sprinted across the yard, expecting bullets to start flying at any moment. Miraculously, they reached the barn without being spotted, ducking inside and pulling the doors closed behind them. "They must all be at the front of the cabin," Beatrice said, breathing hard. "They don't know we've slipped out yet." Gideon moved to one of the barn's small windows, peering out cautiously. "I can see 3 of them by the front porch. The 4th must be around the side, and the 5th is right here," came a voice from the shadows behind them. They spun to find Caleb Blackwell, the youngest of the brothers, emerging from behind a stack of hay bales, his revolver trained on them. "Drop your weapons," he ordered. "Now." Gideon assessed their options in a split second. Caleb was the least experienced of the brothers, barely 20 years old, and his gun hand had a noticeable tremor. A distraction might give them a chance. "You don't want to do this, boy," Gideon said, making no move to drop his rifle. "Your brother drew first. Everyone in that saloon saw it." "Shut up," Caleb's voice cracked. "You killed Drew. Nothing else matters." "It matters if you're hanging for murder," Beatrice said softly, taking a small step to the side. "That's what this will be, Caleb, not justice. Murder." The young man's eyes flickered toward her, his concentration wavering. "Stay where you are." That brief shift in attention was all Gideon needed. He lunged forward, knocking Caleb's gun aside as it discharged harmlessly into the barn wall. They grappled briefly before Gideon managed to land a solid punch that sent the younger man sprawling to the ground, unconscious. "Tie him up," Gideon said grimly, retrieving Caleb's fallen weapon. "His brothers will have heard that shot." Sure enough, shouts came from outside, followed by the sound of running footsteps approaching the barn. Beatrice quickly bound Caleb's hands and feet with rope from a nearby hook, then rejoined Gideon at the window. "We're surrounded," she observed as the remaining 4 Blackwell brothers took positions around the barn. "And that shot will have told them exactly where we are." Gideon's mind raced. "The horses. If we can mount up and break out the back door at full gallop, we might have a chance." "And go where?" Beatrice shook her head. "No, this is my home. I'm through running from them." Before Gideon could argue, Jeremiah Blackwell's voice boomed from outside. "Oakley, we know you're in there. Send out our brother and maybe we'll let the woman live." "Your brother's fine," Gideon called back. "Which is more than I can say for you if you don't clear out of here." A hail of bullets was the only response, peppering the wooden walls of the barn. Gideon and Beatrice ducked down, covering their heads as splinters flew. "They're going to tear this place apart," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the danger. "And when they're done with the barn, they'll burn it like they tried with the cabin." Gideon knew she was right. They were outgunned and surrounded with no sign of Sheriff Davis and his deputies. Their options were dwindling rapidly. "I could go out," he said quietly, "draw their fire, give you a chance to escape on horseback." Beatrice's blue eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare suggest sacrificing yourself. We're in this together, remember?" "Then what do you suggest?" he demanded. "Because I'm not watching you die because of my trouble." "It's not just your trouble anymore," she retorted. "It's ours." Their argument was cut short by a new volley of gunfire, but this time it wasn't directed at the barn. Shouts of confusion came from the Blackwells, followed by the clear, authoritative voice of Sheriff Davis. "Throw down your weapons. You're surrounded." Gideon risked a glance through the window and saw that the sheriff had indeed arrived with at least 6 armed deputies. They had taken positions around the perimeter, effectively trapping the Blackwells between themselves and the barn. "About damn time," Gideon muttered, relief washing over him. For a tense moment, it seemed the Blackwells might choose to fight it out, but faced with superior numbers and position, they eventually surrendered, dropping their weapons as ordered. Gideon and Beatrice emerged cautiously from the barn, Beatrice leading the still groggy Caleb. Sheriff Davis approached them, his expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. "Sorry we're late," he said. "Found the trail blocked by felled trees, had to take the long way around." He looked at the Blackwell brothers, now being disarmed and handcuffed by his deputies. "I reckon these boys will be spending a good long time behind bars. Attempted murder, arson, the list goes on." "Will it stick?" Gideon asked, not daring to hope this nightmare might truly be over. Davis nodded grimly. "I've got witnesses to their threats and now to their attack. Plus, I received another wire from Denver last night with sworn statements about what happened with Drew." He glanced at the cabin, where smoke was still visible from the attempted fire. "They won't be troubling either of you again, I promise you that." As the deputies led the Blackwells away, Beatrice surveyed the damage to her homestead: broken windows, bullet holes, scorch marks. "It could have been worse," she said with remarkable equanimity. Gideon looked at her in wonder. "How can you be so calm? They nearly burned you out." "But they didn't," she pointed out. "The cabin's standing, the barn's standing, we're both alive." A small smile touched her lips. "I'd call that a victory." Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. "I'll send some men out later to help with repairs, least we can do." He tipped his hat to them both. "You two take care now, been enough excitement for one day." As he rode away with his deputies and their prisoners, Gideon and Beatrice were left alone once more, standing in the early morning light amid the aftermath of battle. "What now?" Gideon asked, suddenly uncertain. The immediate danger had passed, and with it, his clear purpose for being there. Beatrice looked at him steadily. "First, we clean up this mess, then we have breakfast. I'm starving." She started toward the cabin, then paused, glancing back at him. "After that." "I suppose that depends on whether you've decided to stay in Butte or keep moving on." The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities. Gideon really looked at her, and saw not just the strong, capable woman who had fought beside him, but someone who understood what it meant to stand your ground. Someone who had offered trust and partnership when he least expected it. Someone who made him want to stop running. "I think," he said slowly, "I might have reason to stay if I'm welcome." The smile that spread across Beatrice's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "You're welcome," she said simply, and held out her hand to him. Gideon took it, their fingers intertwining naturally, and together they walked back to the cabin to begin the work of rebuilding. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Sheriff Davis sent men to help repair the damage to Beatrice's homestead. The community's response surprised Gideon miners, shopkeepers, and ranchers from around Butte arrived with supplies and willing hands, many expressing relief that the Blackwell brothers had finally been brought to justice. "I didn't realize you had so many friends," Gideon remarked one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset after another day of work. Beatrice smiled. "I wouldn't call all of them friends. But takes care of its own, and the Blackwells made enemies of a lot of people over the years." She glanced at him. "Besides, you're developing quite a reputation yourself as the man who stood his ground against them." Gideon shook his head, still uncomfortable with the attention. "I was just trying to survive. Sometimes that's enough." She was silent for a moment. "The trial starts next week. Sheriff Davis says we'll both need to testify." The Blackwells were being held in the county jail, charged with multiple counts of attempted murder, arson, and various other crimes. The evidence against them was substantial, but Gideon had learned not to take justice for granted. "Will you be all right facing them again?" he asked. Beatrice's blue eyes were clear and determined. "I've been facing them down for a year. One more time won't break me." She turned to him. "What about you? Are you ready to put all this behind you?" "More than ready," he admitted. "I've spent too long looking over my shoulder." During those weeks of rebuilding, Gideon had taken a room in town, riding out to Beatrice's homestead each day to work. It had seemed the proper thing to do, though part of him missed the easy companionship they'd developed during his brief stay at the cabin. Their relationship had shifted into something undefined more than friendship, but with boundaries neither had yet dared to cross. Gideon had also begun looking for more permanent work in Butte. The copper mines were always hiring, but the idea of spending his days underground held little appeal. Instead, he'd found employment with a freight company that ran supplies between Butte and the surrounding settlements. The work was honest and paid well enough, allowing him to begin saving money for the first time in years. "Have you given any thought to your plans after the trial?" Beatrice asked, breaking into his reflections. The question caught him off guard. "I suppose I'll keep working for Virgin Freight. Maybe look for a small place of my own eventually." Something flickered in her expression, disappointment, perhaps. "That sounds sensible," she said, her tone carefully neutral. Gideon studied her profile in the fading light, trying to read what remained unspoken between them. Since that morning when they'd held hands walking back to the cabin, there had been no further physical contact between them, though he'd caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. He began, then hesitated, unsure how to express what he was feeling. "These past weeks working here with you, it's been good, better than good." She turned to face him fully. "It has," she agreed softly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about having reasons to stay in Butte." Gideon took a deep breath. "The truth is, you're the main reason. Not the job, not the town. You." The words hung in the air between them, a confession he couldn't take back. Beatrice's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. "I don't have much to offer," he continued when she didn't speak. "My name's finally clear, but I'm still just a drifter trying to put down roots." "Gideon," she said at last, her voice gentle. "Do you really think I care about any of that? I've seen who you are when it matters, when there's danger, when there's work to be done, when your word is given." She shook her head slightly. "Those things tell me far more than what you own or where you've been." Hope swelled in his chest. "What are you saying, B?" Instead of answering directly, she reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I'm saying that I have a homestead that's too much for one person to manage properly. I'm saying that I've grown accustomed to having you around. And I'm saying that if you're looking for somewhere to put down those roots, there's room here." Gideon looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "Are you proposing to me, Beatrice Lawson?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips. A blush colored her cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. "I suppose I am, in a way. Though if you tell anyone in town that I did the asking, I'll deny it completely." He laughed then, a free and joyful sound he barely recognized as his own. "Your secret's safe with me." His expression grew more serious. "But are you sure? You barely know me." "I know enough," she said, echoing her words from weeks before. "The rest we can learn together." Gideon raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Then yes, I accept your proposal, whatever form it takes." Beatrice smiled, and in that moment, she was the most beautiful thing Gideon had ever seen. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepened with a certainty that took his breath away. When they finally parted, Beatrice's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the sensation. When she opened them, there was a look of wonder on her face that mirrored what Gideon felt in his own heart. "Well," she said a bit breathlessly, "that's settled then." The trial of the Blackwell brothers began the following week in the Butte Courthouse, a relatively new building that reflected the town's growing prosperity and permanence. Gideon and Beatrice both testified to the events of that night, as did Sheriff Davis and several other witnesses who had experienced the Blackwells' intimidation over the years. Throughout the proceedings, the brothers maintained their innocence, claiming they had been defending family honor. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury took less than an hour to return a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge sentenced them to 20 years each in the territorial prison, effectively removing the threat they posed for the foreseeable future. "It's really over," Beatrice said as they left the courthouse. She looked lighter somehow, as if a burden she'd carried for years had finally been lifted. Gideon squeezed her hand. "It's over, and something new is just beginning." They walked through the bustling streets of Butte, drawing curious glances and knowing smiles from those who had noticed their growing closeness. Gideon found he didn't mind the attention as much as he once might have. This town was becoming home in a way no place had been since before the war. "I spoke with Reverend Miller yesterday," Beatrice said casually as they passed the small church near the center of town. "He's available 2 Sundays from now if that suits." Gideon stopped walking, turning to face her with raised eyebrows. "You've been making plans without me." "Just preliminary inquiries," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I thought it best to secure his services before someone else did, but has a shortage of eligible women, you know, and weddings are becoming quite frequent." "Is that so?" Gideon couldn't help smiling. "And here I thought I might have time to court you properly before we took that step." Beatrice tilted her head. "Gideon Oakley, we've already faced down armed men together and decided to share a home. I'd say we've moved well beyond the courting stage, wouldn't you?" He laughed, shaking his head in wonder at this remarkable woman who had turned his life upside down in the best possible way. "When you put it like that, 2 weeks seems like a very long time to wait." "That's what I thought." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Besides, propriety suggests we should be married if we're going to be living under the same roof. People talk." "Let them," Gideon said, not caring who saw as he bent to kiss her briefly. "But yes, 2 Sundays from now sounds perfect." The wedding was a simple affair, attended by what seemed like half the population of Butte. Sheriff Davis served as Gideon's best man, while Beatrice was attended by Sarah Miller, the Reverend's wife who had become a close friend. The church was decorated with wildflowers gathered from the hills around the homestead, and afterward, the celebration moved to the town square, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by well-wishers. Throughout the day, Gideon found himself marveling at how quickly life could change. 6 months ago, he'd been a hunted man with no future beyond the next day. Now he stood beside his bride, accepted by a community with plans and hopes that stretched far into the future. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked as they shared a quiet moment away from the festivities. She looked radiant in her wedding dress, a simple cream-colored gown that complemented her honey-brown hair, which she'd worn loose around her shoulders. "How lucky I am," Gideon replied honestly. "That bullet that grazed me might be the best thing that ever happened to me," she smiled. "I prefer to think it was me finding you in that gully rather than the bullet itself." "Fair point, Mrs. Oakley." Beatrice's smile widened at the name. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We have time," he said, drawing her closer. All the time in the world. As the celebration continued around them, Gideon realized there was one more thing he needed to do, something he hadn't done since he was a boy, saying prayers at his mother's knee. With Beatrice's hand in his, he closed his eyes briefly and silently thanked whatever power might be listening for bringing them together. When he opened his eyes, he found Beatrice watching him with a curious expression. "Were you just praying?" she asked softly. Gideon felt a flush of embarrassment. "Something like that doesn't come naturally to me anymore." Her blue eyes softened. "I never took you for a praying man." "I haven't been," he admitted. "Not for a very long time, but today, it seemed right somehow." Beatrice reached up to touch his face gently. "Amen to that," she whispered, and Gideon felt something settle in his soul at the word, his first amen in decades, and it had come from the lips of a woman he'd once tried desperately to ignore. It seemed fitting, somehow, that Beatrice would be the one to guide him back to faith, not in a distant God he wasn't sure he believed in, but in the possibilities of the future, in the goodness that could still be found in a harsh world, and in the healing power of love when you least expected to find it. As autumn turned to winter, Gideon and Beatrice settled into married life with a naturalness that surprised them both. The homestead flourished under their combined efforts. Gideon continued working for Virgin Freight several days a week, while also helping to expand and improve the property. They added to the barn, repaired fences, and began planning for the horse breeding operation Beatrice had always dreamed of. Their evenings were spent in comfortable companionship, reading by the fire, discussing the day's events, or simply enjoying each other's presence. Gideon found peace in these quiet moments, a sense of belonging he'd thought forever lost to him. "I've been thinking," Beatrice said one night as they sat at the kitchen table going over accounts. "We should give the homestead a proper name." Gideon looked up from the ledger. "It doesn't have one already," she shook her head. "Pa just called it the place, never saw the need for anything fancier." She tapped her pencil against the paper thoughtfully. "But if we're going to build something here, something that might last beyond us someday, it should have a name." The casual reference to a future that extended beyond their own lives to children and perhaps grandchildren who might one day call this place home warmed Gideon's heart. "What did you have in mind?" "I was thinking Gully Ridge," she said with a small smile, "since that's where we met." Gideon reached across the table to take her hand. "I like it. Reminds me of the luckiest day of my life." "Mine too," Beatrice admitted, though I didn't realize it at the time. As winter deepened, but was transformed by snow that blanketed the hills and muffled the constant activity of the mining operations. The homestead, now officially named Gully Ridge, stood like an island amid the white expanse, smoke curling from its chimney in defiance of the cold. Inside, Gideon and Beatrice had made the cabin more comfortable with small additions and improvements. A bookshelf now stood along one wall, filled with volumes they'd collected or been gifted by friends. New curtains hung at the windows, and quilts made by the women of Butt adorned the bed and chairs. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite the harsh weather. Beatrice insisted on decorating with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Gideon found himself caught up in her enthusiasm. He secretly arranged to have a special gift made for her, a silver locket with their initials engraved on the outside and the date they met inside. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire sharing a cup of hot cider, Beatrice suddenly took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I have a gift for you," she said softly, her eyes shining. "One that won't arrive until summer." It took a moment for her meaning to register, and when it did, Gideon felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Are we?" She nodded, her smile radiant. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Gideon." Joy unlike anything he'd ever known surged through him. He gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious glass. "A baby," he repeated, the word both terrifying and wonderful. "Our baby." Beatrice laughed, the sound like music. "Yes, our baby. Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said truthfully, pulling back to look at her. "I never thought I'd have this: a home, a wife, a child. I'd given up on ever having a family again." "Well, you have one now," she said, touching his face gently, "and you're stuck with us." That night, as Beatrice slept beside him, Gideon found himself doing something that was becoming less foreign. He prayed. Not formally, not with any particular faith, but with a profound gratitude that needed expression. He thanked whatever forces had brought him to that gully outside Bud on that fateful morning, and he promised to be worthy of the gifts he'd been given. As the months passed, and spring began to soften the Montana landscape, Beatrice's condition became more evident. She remained active, refusing to be treated as fragile, though she did reluctantly agree to reduce some of her more strenuous tasks around the homestead. Gideon found himself becoming protective, sometimes to the point of hovering, which earned him fond exasperation from his wife. "I'm with child, not made of china," she would remind him. But he noticed she didn't truly mind his attentiveness, often leaning into his touch when he placed a hand on her growing belly. The news of their impending parenthood had spread through Butte, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing gifts, advice, and offers of help. Gideon was touched by the community's response, still sometimes surprised by how thoroughly they had been accepted. "Did you ever think your life would look like this?" Beatrice asked one evening as they walked along the ridge behind their home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. Gideon considered the question seriously. "No," he admitted. "After the war, after losing my family, I stopped looking ahead, just focused on surviving each day." He glanced at her. "What about you? Is this the life you imagined?" She smiled, her hand resting on her rounded abdomen. "Parts of it. I always knew I wanted to stay on this land, make something of what my father started." Her expression grew more thoughtful. "But I didn't expect you, Gideon Oakley. You were the surprise." "A good surprise, I hope." Beatrice stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "The best," she said simply, and raised herself on tiptoes to kiss him. Their moment was interrupted by a sharp intake of breath from Beatrice. She clutched Gideon's arm, her eyes widening. "What is it?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Is it the baby?" "No, it's—" She broke off as it happened again, then laughed. "It's kicking, here, feel." She guided his hand to a spot on her belly, and after a moment of stillness, Gideon felt it a definite push against his palm. Wonder spread through him at this tangible evidence of the new life they'd created. "That's our child," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "Yes," Beatrice agreed, her eyes shining. "Impatient to join us, I think." As summer approached, Gideon found work keeping him closer to home. Bergen Freight had promoted him to manager of their Butte operations, which meant more responsibility but less time on the road, a change he welcomed with the baby's arrival drawing near. He also spent more time working on the homestead, preparing for both the birth and their future. With the help of friends from town, he added a small nursery to the cabin and expanded the corral to accommodate the horses Beatrice planned to acquire for her breeding program once she was back on her feet. Sheriff Davis, now a frequent visitor and trusted friend, helped Gideon build a cradle from pine harvested on their own land. "Never thought I'd see the day," the lawman remarked as they worked. "When I first met you, you looked like a man with no tomorrow. Now look at you building for a future." Gideon smiled, smoothing a rough edge of the wood. "Amazing what the right person can do to change your perspective." "Beatrice is a special woman," Davis agreed. "Always knew she'd find someone worthy of her eventually." "I'm still working on being worthy," Gideon admitted. "Some days, I wake up afraid it's all been a dream, that I'll open my eyes and be back on the run again." The sheriff nodded, understanding. "That feeling fades with time, trust me on that." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah Miller's arrival in a buggy. The Reverend's wife had taken it upon herself to check on Beatrice regularly, bringing supplies and companionship during the last stages of her pregnancy. "How is she today?" Gideon asked, setting aside his tools. "Restless," Sarah replied with a knowing smile. "Which is perfectly normal at this stage. The baby could come any day now. Those words sent a jolt of both excitement and terror through Gideon. Despite months of preparation, he still didn't feel ready for the monumental change that was about to occur in their lives. That night, as he and Beatrice lay in bed, her discomfort was evident. She shifted constantly, unable to find a comfortable position. "Is there anything I can do?" Gideon asked, feeling helpless. "Just be here," she said, squeezing his hand. "That's enough." In the early hours of the morning, Beatrice woke him with a firm shake. "Gideon," she said, her voice tense. "It's time, the baby's coming." What followed was the longest day of Gideon's life. He rode into town at a gallop to fetch Dr. Wilson, then returned to find Beatrice already in the throes of labor, attended by Sarah Miller, who had been summoned by a neighbor. The doctor arrived and immediately took charge, banishing Gideon from the bedroom with firm instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. The hours passed in an agonizing blur. Gideon paced the small confines of the cabin's main room, wincing at each cry of pain from his wife. Sheriff Davis arrived mid-morning, having heard the news in town, and provided much-needed moral support. "Women are stronger than we'll ever be," the sheriff observed as another pained sound came from the bedroom. "My wife brought 3 children into this world. Watching her, I knew I couldn't have endured what she did." "I feel so useless," Gideon confessed, running a hand through his hair for what felt like the 100th time. "I should be in there with her." "Your time will come," Davis assured him. "Right now, the best thing you can do is let the doctor and Sarah do their work." As afternoon faded into evening, the cries from the bedroom changed in character, becoming more purposeful. Then, suddenly, a new sound filled the cabin, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Gideon froze in the act of pacing, his heart seeming to stop and then restart with a thunderous beat. The door to the bedroom opened and Sarah Miller appeared, her face tired but beaming. "Congratulations, Mr. Oakley," she said. "You have a son, a strong, healthy boy, a son." The words echoed in Gideon's mind as he struggled to comprehend them. A son, he had a son. "Beatrice," he managed to ask, "is doing wonderfully," Sarah assured him. "The doctor is just finishing up. You can go in now." Sheriff Davis clapped him on the shoulder. "Go meet your boy," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I'll wait here." On legs that suddenly felt unsteady, Gideon entered the bedroom. The scene before him would be forever etched in his memory. Beatrice, propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her face radiant as she looked down at the small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile tired but triumphant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Gideon moved to her side, perching carefully on the edge of the bed. The baby was wrapped in a soft blanket, only his tiny face visible red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair that Gideon recognized as his own. "He's perfect," Gideon whispered, afraid to touch him. "You're both perfect." Beatrice shifted slightly. "Would you like to hold him?" I don't know how." "Like this," she said, demonstrating how to support the baby's head as she transferred him to Gideon's arms. The weight was so slight, yet it seemed to Gideon that he had never held anything so significant. The baby squirmed slightly, then settled, his eyes still closed. A wave of protectiveness unlike anything Gideon had ever felt washed over him. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your pa." The simple statement brought unexpected tears to his eyes. He looked at Beatrice, overcome. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything, for this." She reached out to touch his face, wiping away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. "Thank you for staying," she replied. "For choosing us." Dr. Wilson, who had been packing his bag in the corner, approached the bed. "Mother and child are doing excellently," he said with professional satisfaction. "You've got a fine family here, Oakley. Family." The word resonated in Gideon's heart as he looked from his son to his wife. This was his family now, the most precious gift he could imagine. "What shall we name him?" Beatrice asked after the doctor had gone, leaving them alone with their newborn. Gideon considered the tiny face before him. "What about James after your brother?" he suggested. "James Lawson Oakley." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "I'd like that very much," she said. "And perhaps Thomas as a middle name after your brother." The fact that she remembered the name of the brother he'd mentioned only once months ago touched Gideon deeply. "James Thomas Lawson Oakley," he said, testing the sound of it. "That's quite a name to live up to." "He'll make it his own," Beatrice said confidently. "Just as we've made this life our own." In the days that followed, Gideon discovered a new dimension to love as he watched Beatrice with their son and felt his own heart expand to encompass this small being who depended on them completely. The sleepless nights and constant demands of caring for a newborn were balanced by moments of pure joy. James's first real smile, the way he gripped Gideon's finger with surprising strength, the peaceful expression on his face as he slept in Beatrice's arms. Summer passed in a haze of domestic adjustments and visitors bringing congratulations and gifts. Gully Ridge continued to flourish, with Gideon taking on most of the physical work while Beatrice recovered and cared for James. By autumn, she was ready to begin implementing her plans for the horse breeding operation, starting with the purchase of 2 promising mares to complement the stallion they had acquired earlier in the year. "You're sure you're not taking on too much?" Gideon asked as they walked the property one crisp October day, James bundled against Beatrice's chest in a sling she had fashioned. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied, her eyes bright with purpose. "This is what I've always wanted, to build something meaningful here, something that can grow and last." She looked down at their sleeping son, then back to Gideon. "And now I have partners in the enterprise." He smiled, slipping an arm around her waist. "Partners for life," he agreed. That night, after James had been fed and settled in his cradle, they sat together before the fire, Beatrice leaning against Gideon's chest as they enjoyed a rare moment of quiet. "I had a letter from the territorial governor today," Gideon mentioned, running his fingers absently through her honey-brown hair. "He's confirmed the charges against the Blackwells will stand. They won't be eligible for parole for at least 15 years. "Good," Beatrice said firmly. "By then, James will be old enough to help defend the homestead if needed. With any luck, he won't have to," Gideon said. "Maybe by then, the West will be a bit more civilized." "Maybe," she conceded, "but I hope it never loses its spirit entirely." She twisted to look up at him. "After all, if it weren't for the wildness of this place, we might never have found each other." Gideon considered this. It was true that their meeting had been born of danger and desperation, qualities that defined much of the frontier experience. Yet out of that chaos had come something ordered and beautiful: a home, a family, a future. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what happened that day in the gully, about how you found me. What about it? Do you believe in Providence, B, that some things are meant to be?" She was silent for a moment, contemplating the question. "I believe there's more to this world than what we can see or understand," she said finally. "Whether you call it God or fate or something else. Yes, I think there are patterns and purposes beyond our knowing." Gideon nodded. "I never used to think that way. After everything I'd seen in the war, afterward I couldn't believe in a world where anything made sense." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But then you came riding into that gully and everything changed." "For me too," she admitted softly. "That morning when you whispered amen after I prayed at our wedding." He paused, searching for the right words. "It was the first time in more than 20 years that word had meant anything to me. It felt like coming home." Beatrice shifted to face him fully. "Gideon Oakley, are you becoming a man of faith?" He smiled slightly. "I don't know about that, but I'm certainly a man with faith in some things now, in you, in us, in the life we're building." He glanced toward the cradle where their son slept. "In the future." She leaned forward to kiss him gently. "Amen to that," she whispered against his lips. And as Gideon held his wife in the warmth of their home with their child sleeping peacefully nearby, he silently echoed her words. Amen indeed to second chances, to unexpected blessings, and to the love that had found him when he least expected it but needed it most. In the years that followed, Gully Ridge grew and prospered under their care. The horse breeding operation gained a reputation for quality throughout the territory, with buyers coming from as far as Denver and Salt Lake City. Gideon eventually left his position with Burgeon Freight to work full-time alongside Beatrice on the homestead, expanding their holdings to include adjacent land when it became available. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair. By the time he was 5, he was following Gideon everywhere, eager to help and learn. The sight of his son's small form trailing after him around the property never failed to fill Gideon with a profound sense of gratitude for the life he now led. When James was 6, he gained a sister, Elizabeth Grace Oakley, born on a snowy December night with considerably less drama than her brother's arrival. Gideon, more prepared this time, had been a steady presence throughout Beatrice's labor, holding her hand and offering comfort until their daughter made her entrance into the world with a lusty cry that announced her presence unmistakably. "She has your spirit," Gideon told Beatrice as they admired their newborn daughter, her small face framed by wisps of honey-brown hair. "Heaven help us all." Beatrice laughed, tired but radiant. "And your stubbornness. Did you hear how she announced herself?" The family settled into new rhythms with the addition of Elizabeth, who quickly proved to be as determined as her name suggested. While James was thoughtful and methodical, his sister was all energy and impulse, keeping her parents on their toes from the moment she learned to crawl. But itself was changing rapidly as the 1880s progressed. The copper mines had transformed it from a small settlement into a booming city, with all the advances and complications that entailed. New businesses opened weekly, the population swelled with immigrants from around the world, and the once quiet streets bustled with activity day and night. Through it all, Gully Ridge remained a haven of relative tranquility on the outskirts of town. Gideon and Beatrice made it a point to preserve the essential character of the homestead, even as they modernized and improved its operations. They added indoor plumbing when it became available, expanded the main house to accommodate their growing family, and invested in new equipment that made their work more efficient. Sheriff Davis, now in his 50s with silver threading his once dark hair, remained a frequent visitor and beloved uncle figure to the children. "You've built something special here," he remarked to Gideon one summer evening as they watched James and Elizabeth chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Something that matters." "We have," Gideon agreed, glancing to where Beatrice sat on the porch, her hands busy with mending but her eyes following her children's antics with a soft smile. "Though there are days I still wonder how I got so lucky." "Not luck," the sheriff corrected. "Choices. You both chose this life, chose each other. That's what makes it mean something." When James turned 10, Gideon began teaching him to ride properly, not just the gentle ponies he'd been allowed until then, but working with the horses that were the backbone of their breeding operation. Beatrice, watching from the fence as father and son moved around the corral, felt her heart swell with pride and love for them both. "He's a natural," Gideon said later as they prepared dinner together in the kitchen. "Has your seat and your way with the animals." "And your patience," Beatrice added, smiling as she sliced bread. "He didn't get frustrated once, even when he couldn't get Daisy to respond to his commands right away." Elizabeth, now 4 and insistent on helping, carefully placed spoons beside each plate. "When can I ride the big horses, Papa?" she asked, her blue eyes exact replicas of her mother's wide with hope. "When you're a bit taller, Princess," Gideon replied, ruffling her honey-brown curls. "For now, you keep practicing with Thunder." Thunder was the aging pony that had been James's first mount, and was now Elizabeth's constant companion. The gentle animal bore the little girl's attentions with stoic patience, even when she insisted on decorating his mane with wildflowers or talking his ear off for hours. "But I want to ride like Mama," Elizabeth protested, her lower lip jutting out in a pout that Gideon found increasingly difficult to resist. "Your mama has been riding since she was very small," he explained, crouching down to her level. "And she practiced for many years before she could ride the way she does now." Beatrice watched the exchange with a smile, thinking how far Gideon had come from the wary, guarded man she'd first met. With their children, he was patient and gentle, firm when needed but never harsh. The demons that had driven him in his younger years seemed to have receded, replaced by a quiet confidence and contentment that suited him well. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing Gideon had built the previous summer, enjoying the cool evening breeze and the symphony of night sounds from the surrounding land. "I had a letter from the parole board today," Gideon said after a comfortable silence. "The Blackwells are coming up for review next month." Beatrice tensed slightly beside him. "After all these years, do you think they'll be released?" "I don't know," he admitted. "They've served 15 years of their 20-year sentences. The board might consider that enough, especially if they've behaved themselves in prison." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Are you worried?" "Not exactly worried," he said thoughtfully, "but cautious. People like that with that much hate in them. I don't know if 15 years is enough to change their fundamental nature." "We have a good life here," Beatrice said firmly. "A strong community, friends, the respect of our neighbors. If the Blackwells are foolish enough to come after us again, they'll find we're not easily intimidated." Gideon smiled, pulling her closer against his side. "That's my Bee, always ready to stand her ground." "Some things are worth fighting for," she said simply. As it turned out, their concern was unnecessary. The parole board denied the Blackwells' request for early release, citing a lack of evidence of rehabilitation. They would serve their full 20-year sentences, by which time, Gideon reasoned, they would be old men, likely with little interest in renewing old vendettas. Life continued to unfold in its steady rhythm at Gully Ridge. James, now in his teens, began taking on more responsibility in the horse breeding operation, showing a real talent for working with the animals and an interest in the business side of things as well. Elizabeth, still headstrong but growing into a thoughtful young woman, developed her mother's love of the land and her father's quiet determination. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Beatrice surprised Gideon with a special gift, a bound collection of photographs documenting their life together, from their wedding day through the birth and growth of their children, the expansion of the homestead, and countless moments of everyday joy in between. "Where did you get all these?" Gideon asked in wonder as he turned the pages. Some of the images he recognized formal portraits taken in town on special occasions, but many were more casual, capturing moments he had forgotten or never known were preserved. "I've been collecting them for years," Beatrice explained, sitting beside him on the sofa. "Mr. Chen at the photography studio helped me put them together in this book." Gideon paused at an image of himself holding infant James, his expression a mixture of terror and adoration as he gazed down at his newborn son. "I had no idea this existed. Sarah Miller's husband took that one," Beatrice said, smiling at the memory. "You were so focused on James, you didn't even notice the camera." He turned another page to find a photograph of the entire family standing in front of the newly expanded house. James about 7 years old, and Elizabeth a toddler in Beatrice's arms. They looked happy, settled a far cry from the man and woman who had met in a dusty gully 20 years earlier. "It's quite a life we've built," Gideon said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, it is," Beatrice agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder, "and we're not done building yet." Later that night, as they lay in the darkness of their bedroom, Gideon found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From hunted outlaw to respected rancher, from solitary drifter to family man, the transformation seemed almost impossible when viewed from the perspective of his younger self. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked, her voice drowsy as she curled against him. "About Providence," he replied, stroking her hair, now streaked with the first threads of silver. About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best. She made a small sound of agreement. If the Blackwells hadn't chased you to Butt, if I hadn't decided to ride out early that morning. If you hadn't been brave enough to offer your hand to a desperate stranger, he continued, if I hadn't been desperate enough to take it. If, Beatrice murmured. So many little moments that had to align perfectly to bring us here. Gideon pulled her closer, overwhelmed as he sometimes still was by the depth of his feeling for this woman. You know, for years after the war, I couldn't make sense of the world. Couldn't see any pattern or purpose in all the suffering I'd witnessed, all the loss. And now, she prompted when he fell silent. Now I think maybe it's not about making sense of everything, he said slowly. Maybe it's about finding moments of grace amid the chaos, like your hand reaching down to me in that gully. Like hearing you whisper amen when I needed it most. Beatrice raised herself on one elbow to look at him in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Gideon Oakley, she said with soft wonder, you've become a philosopher in your old age, he chuckled. Hardly old, just wiser maybe. She leaned down to kiss him tenderly. I love you, wise man. And I thank God every day for bringing you into my life, even if it took bullets and desperate circumstances to do it. As she settled back against him, Gideon whispered, Amen to that. And this time, the word came naturally to his lips, a fitting affirmation of the blessings he had found when he least expected them: a home, a purpose, a family, and most of all, a love that had transformed him completely. In the quiet Montana night, with his wife in his arms and their children sleeping safely down the hall, the cowboy who had once never prayed found himself offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the woman who had refused to be ignored, and the life they had built together, a life that, against all odds, had become more beautiful than he could have imagined possible. Amen, indeed.